No, not really. But she did a good job, didn't she? And when it comes to these fines then, well, how do we dispute them? What do we need to know? Joining me now is consumer rights expert Scott Dixon, who knows a thing or two when it comes to disputing fines. Hiya, Scott.
Good morning, John.
Good morning. Okay, so what do? You're in this position, you think you've done all the right things, you bought the right tickets, and then you get that letter through the door. What's the first thing you should do?
Well, the first thing to note is that it's a parking charge notice, and it's not a fine. So the ticket on the windscreen was simply an invoice for an alleged breach of contract for parking on private land. So it's not a fine that you need to pay. And this car park is owned by Gloucester Bid, and that's confirmed on their website. So this is a known issue that's been going on for years, and it's been widely reported with reviews online dating back to January 2020. So the first thing you need to do if you receive a ticket on your windscreen is wait until one comes through in the post, because they do not know at that point who the keeper of the vehicle is. So you're inadvertently telling them when you ring up to contact them who the vehicle belongs to. So you always wait until the ticket comes through in the post.
Right.
So that's the first thing to note. And private parking operators, they use legalese jargon and discounts to intimidate and coerce you into paying that invoice, which is why Mr. Forbes felt compelled to pay it, even though he never needed to at all, as he had proof of payment with a time and date stamp. And, he did lodge an appeal, which will always be rejected at the first stage, in most cases anyway.
I suppose the thing is, Scott, you get that thing on your windscreen, and most of us, if you're sort of a decent thinking person, you go, oh no, I've done the wrong thing, I better pay the fine, and then that is the thing, isn't it? But you're saying, actually, don't just go in and do it, question what's going on first.
Yeah, it's simply an invoice for an alleged breach of contract. And in Mr. Forbes' case, there was no breach of contract because he paid more than necessary for the parking. This is a known trap by the private parking operator, because you can pay over the day and evening tariff with the app, but you can't by paying cash. And the machine is deliberately set up to trap motorists, because there are patrollers on site that are deliberately issuing invoices on the windscreen at 6 to catch people out. And the signage, when you look at the signage, it says that it's private property, but it's not private property, because the car park belongs to Gloucestershire Council, and that's confirmed on the Gloucester Bid website. So the signage is wrong, and it's deliberately misleading as well. If the ticket expires at 6 o'clock, it should be clearly displayed on the signage, that you need to pay over 2 tariffs. And do they expect somebody to arrive a few minutes before 6 o'clock and then revisit just after 6 o'clock to pay another tariff? Everything should be made clear on the sign for consumers to make an informed decision.
This is it's obviously quite a complicated thing, isn't it? Because it's owned by one person, it's run by another group, and then actually, there's the signs and all that sort of stuff. And we have had a couple of calls from people talking about the signs here as well. But I suppose that's one of those ongoing things. And we did hear from Emily Gibbon from the Bid earlier, who said, look, we know this is an issue, and we're going to sort it out. And we really hope that Doug is going to be the last person to be affected by some of this. When it comes to those sort of wider things then, so, question it, don't pay it straight away, wait for something to come through the post. Any more sort of just general good bits of advice from you, Scott, when it comes to these sorts of situations then?
Well, the invoice, when it arrives by post, the first thing you need to do is check the 2 dates on it. So you've got the date of the parking incident and the date of issue. And these invoices need to be issued within 14 days of the parking incident under Schedule 4 of the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012. Any later than that, and it's considered out of time and invalid. But that doesn't mean that you can ignore it. You simply appeal as the keeper without revealing who the driver is, because you're only invited to disclose who the driver is. You're not legally obliged to. And there is specific wording to use. You never use the word I or we, as you're inadvertently identifying the driver as liable. And I do have a template on my website, the complaintsresolve.co.uk, with a parking ticket guide for anyone to download for free. And I've also published a book entitled How to Complain, The Consumer Guide to Cancelling Parking Tickets and Winning Pothole Claims, which your listeners will also find useful as a source of reference. But always appeal an unfair parking ticket. The most common reason for appeals is confusion on obscured signs. And Gloucestershire Council, as landowners, have a duty to get this resolved, as it will be affecting local trade and deterring anyone from visiting Gloucester. But it's important to note here as well, John, that the Consumer Rights Act 2015 applies, and the signage in this case was inadequate to form a contract for consumers like Mr. Forbes to make an informed decision, and it doesn't meet the Consumer Rights Act 2015. And there's a fairness test within that, because the sign forms part of the contract and the terms and conditions that you're entering into. And any term that unfairly tilts the balance in favour of the trader to the detriment of the consumer is invalid. And Section 62 states that an unfair term of a contract or notice is not binding on the consumer, and Section 68 has a requirement for transparency. So he never needed to pay it, and I would advise anybody else caught in a similar scenario is just wait until an invoice arrives by post.
Yeah. All right, Scott, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. That's Scott Dixon, their consumer rights expert, with some really good tips on actually what you should do if you're in this situation, and what you need to know as well when it comes to your rights. Of course, we covered this story extensively on the show last week when it came to some of that signage with the response from the council, and we heard from Emily Gibbon a little bit earlier on in the show as well from Gloucester Bid, who said, look, we're aware there's an